We are in the midst of a fascinating study of the life divine in the chapter titled Rebirth and Other Worlds, in which he discusses the role of karma, the nature of the soul, and the means of, or the secret of, immortality. We have, in the last few pages of our study, explored the nature of the personality in relation to the inner being and the soul. And Sri Aurobindo brought us to the recognition that this person that we find ourselves to be is only a superficial, temporary formation which is used by the soul for the purpose of its evolution by taking upon a limited personality in which it can experience a limited aspect of life, develop a kind of a specialized world experience in order to be assimilated into the essential soul personality within. And discarding this temporary formation, it now creates a new formation, perhaps a completely different personality, for the purpose of a new line of experience. And all of these different personalities that it has lived in and lived through are as if held in their essence at the level of the inmost soul, where they are available at any point to be drawn out, either for the purpose of creation of a new personality, in which elements of the past may be brought forward, or even in the midst of a certain circumstance of life, in which it can resort to a particular specialized experience or power developed in some other personality or incarnation that it has had. And the idea that we should hold this temporary formation of personality and drag it on across lives now appears not only wrong, but it even appears silly and contrary to the purpose of the soul's evolution. The importance given to the memory of past lives now fades, and Sri Aurobindo even points out it is better that we lose the past memory so that there can be a fresh start in the new personality without the hangover and baggage of limitations of the past personality. And yet, in the portion we read last time, Sri Aurobindo highlights the tendency of memories to return, while at the same time showing why memories need to fade, or why it is not surprising that a past life memory will fade, because even in our present life, our memories of childhood or even later years begin to fade and we retain only the essence of what we have become. Even if by some accident we lose entirely our past memory, it does not change who we are as a person or as a personality. It does not prevent us from functioning and progressing. And so if the soul literally sheds 3 layers of personality, transitions through a completely different domain of consciousness of other worlds, and then takes back 3 completely new layers of personality and enters this form, it is not surprising that the memory does not remain. But what is surprising is the memory somehow does pop out. There are fragmentary recollections of past births, sometimes crossing even these barriers. And in this, he points out that what normally comes through is as if from some submerged layer one feels we didn't even know that we knew it. Some distant, deep part pushes forward a suggestion. And he says it is often what comes forward is in the shape of a perception of the stuff and power of past personalities that are effective in the composition of the being in the present life. A tendency, for example, for a turn of musicality and familiarity with the sense of harmonies, or a spontaneous sense of appreciation of the deeper nuances of art or of language, or some deep insight that comes in a very narrow, specific line of specialization of life, which may be so specific, for example, an affinity or familiarity with crystals and their utility. So it can be so narrow and specific, and yet we do not know where it comes from, just the sense of something deep inside from which that familiarity emerges. Generally, memories of past lives come in this way. But, he says also, that although in parts it can recur, the details of events and circumstances can recur or can be recovered. And we saw last time the three ways by which the details can be recovered. First was a more visual and superficial access, which is by concentration from the subliminal vision. And we are normally so fixed on the surface vision looking out that we have never turned attention to the inner vision or worked to develop its powers. As an example, we all have the power of seeing with our outer sight, but in the mind's eye. So you can close your eyes and remember events, picture them even. But this is still the vision turned outward. The same vision can turn inward and thereby access elements of your inner life. As when you see a child daydreaming, in which they may imagine or visualize themselves flying with fairies, or creating a world of their own fantasy, which we dismiss as a waste of time or meaningless fantasy. But at that moment, this power of the inner sight is actually being tapped, although still somewhat superficially. And if you allowed the child to explore that, the access to the inner world might still remain. But by discouraging it, we have blocked that off. This power tends to reawaken as we begin to practice deep meditation. It does not come from superficial meditations, where again the attention is turned outwards to the physical senses. There are practices, for example, for following the breathing, or for focusing on sensations of the skin or emotions or whatever associated with the surface part of the personality. And these practices, although useful to partially interiorize, do not really turn the consciousness inward. The inward turn begins when our attention disengages from the surface and plunges with full focus inward, either to become conscious of, or to deepen the contact with the divine presence within, or some power of that presence within. And it is in this inward turn that this capacity of the subliminal vision, the inner layers, the vision in the inner layers, that begins to awaken. At first, because it is not there, it has been so dulled or forgotten, when we turn in, it is only like a blank into which you are plunging. But there is a sense of plunging. Eventually, though, one begins to develop something akin to the five senses, but in that inward space, where form is not the priority, but feeling or a deeper kind of a more essential perception begins to emerge, which are natural for this inner seeing to perceive. And with that, often, sometimes clear images or clear memories can come. And the characteristic of these memories and even images is, first what comes is a feeling or an experience. And then with that experience arises a sensation or an emotion of familiarity. And out of that perhaps a picture may form. Need not always, but may form. But what comes through in that initial emergence is much more the quality and content of the experience as it was held in the inner being. And this is where we come to the second layer of perception, where he says, from some secret memory, concentration on some secret memory. So you dwell upon this feeling, and as if the feeling draws out something more which was hidden, and things emerge. And the third, which is even the most essential part of us, concentration on or from our inner conscious substance, the very substance of who we are as the inner personality of the soul, is what you are, is made up of the experience, is the memory. It's no more something remembered, it is something that you're familiar with in identity. Obviously, all three of these kinds of perception are much more directly accessed when the intuitive powers develop and the intuitive working becomes more normal. But Sri Aurobindo's conclusion, which we saw last time, is that this detailed memory is of minor importance to nature in her normal work, and she makes small or no provision for it, for this detailed memory. Rather, the shaping of the future evolution of the being, it is the shaping of the future evolution of the being with which she is concerned. And so the past is put back behind the veil and used as material for the present and the future. Now, this now brings us to the next level of discussion. Why would we want this continuity of personality to extend? Why would we want to live forever when nature wants to keep this freedom to have different personalities? And what is the requirement by which we can make this temporary personality more and more permanent? And this is going to be over the next two paragraphs, which effectively you will find he is revealing to you the secret of immortality. The means by which you can actually extend this memory of this life and personality into the next, when all the logic so far has been, it's not helpful at all. So what are the conditions under which not only it would be helpful, but nature would actually cooperate with this process? Now in this, he has used the word nature as if it's a conscious person. When he says, this detailed memory is of minor importance to nature in her normal work, and she makes small or no provision for it. The implication is that if she wanted to, she could have made provision for it. She could have made larger or lesser provision for it, but she has not bothered. And if she agrees to, she might even allow us to make provision for it. But now we have to get into a bargain, a discussion with her. We will place our demand and she will put a condition. And you'll see this becomes the vocabulary of his next discussion. So the next paragraph, this conception of the person, capital P, and the personality, capital P, if accepted, must modify at the same time our current ideas about the immortality of the soul. For, normally when we insist on the soul's undying existence, what is meant is the survival after death of a definite, unchanging personality which was and will always remain the same throughout eternity. This is the idea we have. So when you say so and so is a reincarnation of X, suppose X was a great artist, well, where's the art? Why doesn't this fellow have any interest in art? He's painting very poorly. How can he be incarnation of that great artist? Or when we insist that we want to be able to recall our past life, the idea is, I will remember what I was when it was never me, this surface personality. A definite, unchanging personality which was and will always remain the same throughout eternity. And we have discussed this idea many times before, so we don't need to elaborate on it. But this idea, we have to keep this in mind. definite, unchanging personality is what is not helpful and therefore not possible. It is the very imperfect, superficial I of the moment, evidently regarded by nature as a temporary form and not worth preserving and not worth preservation, for which we demand this stupendous right to survival and immortality. So we are asking this right to survival and to be immortal. For what? For this form. And see how Sri Aurobindo describes the form. Very imperfect. You will not find Sri Aurobindo using the word very easily. He will say it is imperfect. But now he says very imperfect, and you have to really think about what that means. When you look at a creation and you say an object, a painting, a poem, a novel, you can say it's imperfect because there are flaws, there are limitations. But when it's very imperfect, then you don't even want to bother reading with it or looking at it or purchasing it, whatever. And this is the nature of this human personality. Consider one person in your whole life that you have known closely, towards whom you can say, yes, this is a person I would like to be like in every way. At best, if you're lucky, you have a few people in your life whose some aspect of personality you would like to emulate, but not the rest. Of course, if you have known them closely enough. If you don't know them closely enough, you can create a false, magical idea of how wonderful they are from a distance. But the moment you come close enough and begin to interact with them on a daily level, all the flaws begin to come out. And then you say, I thought so-and-so was so great, and now I find he's totally the very opposite. And you are disillusioned. But that was only an illusionment you had, which you got free from. The reality is, anybody, you will have to face these things. Why? Because that's the nature of the current evolutionary formation of personality on the most surface part. Look at yourself very objectively as others see you from outside, and you will find it a very disturbing experience. You will hate the person that you actually are. At the same time, if you disengage from the surface personality and begin to feel yourself as you feel yourself to be inside, not the way people see you, and you find such a sweet and loving and caring and happy and creative or whatever, all the positive attributes of personality. That's what you want to be, that's what you feel yourself to be, but what comes across on the surface is often the very opposite. The difference between these two is this very imperfect. And then next attribute he gives to it, superficial. What is it compared to what you feel yourself to be? It is completely on the surface where you have all these reactions and contradictions that you are within. It's also in this part of the personality entirely obsessed with superficialities of life. My comforts, my food, my friendships, my sensory experiences, my importance in other people's views, thoughts, value systems. It's all about how others perceive you, not what you feel yourself to be. If you began to live truly by what you want, very likely you wouldn't do the things that you're doing. Very likely. Very few are those who, from the beginning of life, have been doing the things they would really want to do and can therefore say, I am entirely in that shape. And even that will undergo change. Mostly, we have got ourselves blocked in a certain groove. Within that groove, what is convenient and easy for us to do is what we like. And we're stuck in that. But we then find ourselves bound more and more to meet expectations of others, and therefore come into some degree of fakeness of our values. I observed with very great interest what happens when people undergo a shock of life. And one of the most dramatic was when the September 11th attacks took place on the Twin Towers in New York. There were people working there who were spending their days and nights basically making transactions of millions or billions. For what purpose? Simply to make money. At what cost? It didn't matter. And they were so fixated on it, they were eating, drinking, thinking, sleeping, that same obsessive pursuit. And when that attack happened, and the ones who survived experienced such a shock, I could have died. And that was such a shock, it caused them to introspect and realize this is not what they wanted for their life. Most of them left that job, went into the countryside with their saved money, and began their own pursuit of what they truly liked or wanted. Mostly, we do not have much choice. Almost everybody you meet is in a job that they hate. Or the field may be what they like, but the nature of the job constricts and binds them. Why don't you break out of it and do what you really like? You don't have a choice. And so, it's a complex condition in which all of your focus is meeting superficial values which are false enough that you actually dislike them or hate them, but you're trapped, unable to free. And that's the personality that you're living in. So, this very imperfect, superficial I of the moment. Now, what is the person that you are? Right now, this person of the moment. What were you like 10 years ago? Well, I was a different person. What will you be like 10 years from now? You can't even imagine. And this I can change moment to moment, even within the day. When I got up this morning, I was feeling so nice, and then this thing happened, and now I'm miserable, unhappy, angry, or whatever it is. And the fluctuation of the personality, from a very nice, likable person, you switch into a terror for the people around you, and so easily, which is the personality that you are. And when a person begins to introspect, you really don't know. The reality is, any deep introspection very quickly brings you to the recognition that this is unreal, unstable, not you. So, very imperfect, superficial I of the moment. And what does nature do when she looks at this? Evidently regarded by nature as a temporary form and not worth preservation. Shed this junk, replace it by another material, start afresh, build something better, shed it, so that you may keep growing. And for this, for which we demand this stupendous right to survival and immortality. I want not only to survive, keep the same thing going for a few decades, for the rest of my life, but also across lives. But the demand is extravagant and cannot be conceded straight away. For the purpose of evolution, which is the priority of nature, it's extravagant. The word extravagant is not only excessive, but also wasteful. Why waste time and energy being stuck in a narrow, limited personality when you can quickly get rid of it and move on in something more helpful to higher growth? So, now we are in negotiation with nature. Cannot be conceded by nature, obviously. The I of the moment can only merit survival if it consents to change. Now, this is the demand from nature's side. This temporary I can survive on one condition: if it consents to change. And then there's a long sentence: to be no longer itself, but something else, greater, better, more luminous in knowledge, more molded in the image of the eternal inner beauty, more and more progressive towards the divinity of the secret spirit. And then it is that secret spirit or divinity of self in us which is imperishable, because it is unborn and eternal. And so here we have the beginning of this secret of immortality. And later he will actually tell you how this can be made possible. But the secret, for the first hint, is the I of the moment can only merit survival if it consents to this change. And the change now he describes through layers. Each layer takes you deeper and closer to the true person within and its personality. To the extent that its personality can begin to register on the surface, or the surface personality can begin to follow the characteristics of the true personality, then you can perhaps merit this possibility or this demand for survival. So, let's look at each of these steps. First, it can merit survival if it consents to change. Now consider how easily do we accept change. And as we grow in age, you can see how we tend to become more and more narrow and rigid in our preferences, even our incapacity to change. And the biggest challenge which I would place to an older person who has not yet done it is start playing with your mobile phone or tablet the way a 10-year-old child plays with it. And most people will say, I am quite aged, I do not do those things. I let my grandson handle it. Okay. Convenient, but why can you not do it? When that child, without any training from you, was able to develop that skill, can you not develop that skill? And if you begin to observe what happens when we try to develop the skill, you face a block. I can't think like that. I'm not creative. I'm scared. I'm not able to explore. Look at the child. He's unafraid. He doesn't care if in doing something he deletes all your data. You are thinking, what if I delete data? Or what if I break it? And so I've seen people sometimes they'll touch gently, gingerly, or something doesn't happen, so you punch harder. It's not happening. But the child is curiously experimenting until he gets it quickly. So you may say, well, the child's mind is plastic and my mind is not plastic. So that's your challenge. Do you want to stay in this inflexible, rigid mind forever? Obviously not. I would like my mind to become plastic. Well, to the extent you can make it plastic, you can fulfill the requirement of nature to be able to extend this mental consciousness. But to the extent that you're unable to make it plastic and change, well, you will have to shed. Let's put it another way. You will have to shed the part of you that is inflexible and unable to change. And if the bulk of you is that, well, then you have to shed the bulk of the personality, for sure. So the first requirement is, if it consents to change, and the vocabulary is very specific, you have a choice. Not if it is capable of change, not if it is willing to change, if it consents. You have to say, yes, I accept whatever the discomfort. I consent and I am willing to undergo the training program required for the required change. Okay, so that's the demand placed on you, first level. And then, which direction will the change grow? To be no longer itself, but something else. Now imagine someone tells you, you're not good as you are as a personality. Will you accept to be something else? No, I don't want to be like that person or like that person. I want to be myself. But something else in yourself. And what is the else? First he says, greater, better, more luminous in knowledge. So you have to grow into something else, meaning compare what you were 10 years ago with what you are now. Compare what you were 20 years ago with what you are now. Compare what you were 40 years ago. Well, depending on your current age. Jump back every 10 or 20 years and see how much you have changed with each of those decades. If that personality could imagine itself being what you are now, would it accept? Could it even imagine itself being that? And there are certain things you might say, yes, of course, now I am so much more mature, and if I could be like that at that time, but could that personality recognize that in changing, in losing itself, it would become something so much greater? Would it accept? Probably not. I am so happy with what I am. Why do you want me to become more, which I don't even know what that more is? And so we have a problem in our very sense of identity. We're so comfortable in our limitation. We have no experience of what it is like to be beyond that limitation, so you cannot conceive of what the change will be like. Effectively, the acceptance should be to become other than me. Although you may tell me you're only going to become a better person of yourself, but that better person is so different from what I am that it practically amounts to letting go of what I am. Can I do that? I believe for all of us who have taken a conscious spiritual turn of life, this capacity or this willingness is somewhere there present. But it requires you to now bring it out consciously and be willing to let go. The extent of that willing to let go, if we may now elaborate on this idea, literally it means dying to what you are in order to grow to what you can be at each moment. And this the mother has described as the secret of eternal youth. At each moment to be able to let go everything that you are in order to become something which is greater. It will start with small things. This is a big demand to say to be able to let go everything. But you must keep this in mind because you must work on yourself consciously to be able to let go everything. It does not happen overnight. It's a state of consciousness, of relationship with yourself that you have to begin to cultivate. And if you start now, well, in a few weeks, in a few months, you will find more and more the capacity within you to become conscious of letting go of what you are. Letting go of your limitations, letting go of the past. Sometimes I find somebody saying a phrase like, I will never forgive X for doing this. I will never forget that thing which happened on such and such an event. The moment you make that statement, oh my God, you're putting an anchor on yourself which drags you back, binds you into the past, limits you, distorts your whole personality. Because the rest of your personality is trying to move forward and you will never let go of this anchor which drags you back. And it literally tears you, prevents the further growth of the rest, and then eventually these things piling up compel the need for shedding the personality so that you can start afresh. And so a process of inner cultivation has to begin, where we start reviewing things. And the most difficult will be when you pick that person with whom you have this huge conflict or hang up and are able to say, all right, I let go of what happened. And I can meet the person and smile without feeling the pinch or the pain or whatever memory comes with that past. To be able to see him as a new person so that I may be a new person. That's your reference. And work on it. So your final reference will be these very difficult connections and being able to let go of them. But start with the small ones, the easy things. Start with little things which have to do with food and other likes and dislikes. Make yourself more plastic, more adaptive. If you have begun this early in life, it's easier because the personality has been brought up with a certain plasticity. But even otherwise, you'll find over time there are parts in you which cannot, like your body. Now with age, automatically my body cannot tolerate more heat or more cold or more of this thing in the food or whatever it is. And that part is not within your conscious domain. It's almost at a subconscious or unconscious level of working. Well, nudge a little bit if you can. But start with the things which are more plastic, your mind. Your emotions, less plastic. Your body, a little bit, perhaps. Most rigid, perhaps. But start where it's possible, where it's easy. And literally it is to be no longer itself, but something else. You don't know what the else is, but you start letting go of what you are. Then comes the next degree of this else. What is this else? Greater. It's a very general term. In what way greater? Well, in every way, or in whichever way you find it most easy. Greater in compassion, in kindness, in affection, in equality or detachment or whatever, all the good things which you may have, well, just a little bit greater, greater, greater. But in the personality, in the thoughts, in the emotions, and to whatever extent in the body. But great has also the sense of widening, going beyond the narrowness in each of these things. And of course, in knowledge, in strength, in skill, and all the rest. One of the things which you will find, which is currently verified by biological research, is that whenever you begin to learn a new skill, there's a change that takes place in the very biology of the brain cells. For a long time, and you will see even in your textbooks today, it was said that the brain grows only for the first 21 years or so, and then after that it's only a gradual decline, you only lose nerves and connections and so on, and well, you cannot grow new cells. In contrast, the mother in the 1950s was telling the children in the ashram, well, every time you learn a new skill, every time you read Sri Aurobindo, your brain is developing new nerves, new cells, and your power of intelligence and your physical brain actually grows. Now, how did she know that? Well, because she was conscious of what was happening inside. But today, science confirms this. It recognizes that that earlier assumption was wrong, or the evidence for it was flawed. And actually, the brain does grow. It does create new neurons, and can even grow a lot. And in more than anything else, it has something called neuroplasticity, where it can reshape its arrangement of content and skills into different areas of the brain which are currently unused. Even if one part is damaged, it can shift the load of that part into another. But it can also grow new cells. And the discovery was that the means to trigger the new growth was learning a new skill, not learning new information. The error people think is, okay, I'm reading more. No, that's not a new skill. That's just more informational content. A new skill, for example, take up juggling balls. It's ridiculously new. It's having nothing to do with your current skills or tendencies. Yes, that will force. It's a physical skill involving also attention of mind, but it is a skill which will force the development and growth of new neurons in the brain. Now, a skill which takes a very narrow scope would affect certain parts of the brain. If you could extend this to something much more, step out of your current body personality, step into a completely new life circumstance where you have to learn everything from scratch. Literally, you transplant yourself in another country with a different culture, with a different language, with a different food and dress code, and try to become them. You can imagine what that would imply. Everything literally in your personality is being relearned. Extremely useful if you're able to do it. But you get the idea. You don't need to actually do that. The point is, you start by learning a skill which requires you to change your personality. And the reshaping of your personality is what triggers the creation of new cells. And so physically, this begins to happen. So something else, greater, better. Now, again, a very general term. What the better means, greater would expand scope, but better would take it to a new level of consciousness. I am, let's say, affectionate by nature. Well, I can widen the scope of my affection. I can now turn it to other beings, other animals, other plants, towards which I did not normally express my affection. That's greater, perhaps. But better means a qualitative change in what I feel to be my affectionate nature. Can you, for example, find a deeper base for that affection? More true, more impersonal, less narrow in the individuality, closer to that which is your ideal. And so with each thing, even in the field of knowledge, in the field of mind consciousness, in the quality of awareness, you can grow greater in the scope, in the widening of your mind's attention, interest, range of knowledge, the limits of your knowledge, your ken. But better would be literally shifting to a higher grade of awareness and being able to perceive and know things. And then that brings us to the next degree, more luminous in knowledge. And this is not just mental knowledge, but in knowledge even of your emotions. So take the first example of the emotions becoming more refined, more clear, more pure, less personal, less attached, less bound, but at the same time becoming clear and pure and luminous in knowledge. The very knowledge of the emotions, awareness that you have of the emotions and their play is becoming more clear, more bright, luminous, less dark, less dull, less mechanical, less instinctive, less sticky. But we don't have a vocabulary for those kinds of experience except through these terms. What's a sticky emotion? Where you have an attachment which you're unable somehow to let go. Often this happens among parents dealing with teenage children or children to whom they're responsible for. They're worried about them. They're always trying to make them be better and save them from harming themselves, or slight changes in their direction of action or thinking. No, don't do like this, do it like that, because you have learned the hard way and you want to save them the trouble of learning the hard way. And if you tell them, look, they're adults, let them learn from their own experience, back off. The parent says, okay. And then immediately they find themselves leaning back. Within a few hours or days, well, it's back. Why? There's a stickiness. There's an attachment. And the same parent meeting children of someone else can be more free, more clear in the interchange. And you try to feel the quality of the difference. You can still be as affectionate with the other as to your own child, but here there is a muddiness, a stickiness that is clear, impersonal, not attached, and yet affectionate. And more affectionate and true because less personally attached. And so there is a clarity, a quality of clarity which comes in the emotions, but the same thing can happen in the mind. The way the mind works at a lower level is thinking, catching pieces, putting, arranging, shaping. But increasingly, as the mind becomes clear and free, it looks, it sees, it knows. There's no struggling thinking, moving in pieces. And the luminosity of the mind that sees and knows is the higher state of consciousness, or the higher state of knowledge even. So when he's using the word knowledge, it's not just a mental knowledge, but the full clarifying in awareness, becoming aware of everything. And a similar thing can happen in the body consciousness also. So some of us would be able to relate to this example if you've been through that kind of experience, where you lived a life where you ate normal food, that is what everybody else eats, and then you went on a diet where you ate only high quality fresh foods, refined in consciousness, not so dulling, maybe a diet of fresh fruits or fresh vegetables, less of the heavy dulling material. And after a while you find, in a few days or weeks, or even sometimes when you go on fasts, your body feels as if more clear, more fresh, more light, less heavy, less dull. And if you try to describe what that is in its essence, it's precisely this: more luminous in its quality of awareness of itself. So this sentence, more luminous in knowledge, is not just in terms of the knowledge here of the mind, but on all these levels you become aware of and clear in your awareness. A kind of a light fills the quality of awareness. And you see where this is leading. One more step. More molded in the image of the eternal inner beauty. Now this is what we should be willing to do if we want to be able to extend this personality, to remain young, and even to carry over into the next body form. Where is this shift of refinement? To change, to be something else, to be greater, better, more luminous in knowledge. It's moving towards more molded in the image of the inner, of the eternal inner beauty. The inner personality is eternal. It has a beauty. And the outer personality, which is formed by this material gathered from the universe and now shaped and developed, is coarse, crude surface layer. Its evolution, or the replacing of it in the series of steps in evolution, is really tending towards reflecting this more and more, which is the inner beauty of the personality. And the inner personality is drawing from the experiences of the surface personality, gathering and aligning it to its growth. And its growth is always beautiful. The sense of beauty, if you have to go into that more deeply, is the sense of harmony, where every part is in perfect alignment and in perfect relation with every other part, representing an innate common truth. It's not mere alignment. You could make a grid mathematically perfectly aligned. Every part is in perfect relation with everything else. That's not beautiful. That's almost a mechanical symmetry. Beauty is when each of these parts in perfect alignment with each other of harmony represents or radiates some innate truth of which they are a form. And when that glows out, that is the beauty. And so yes, it uses form, but it is not essentially form. Form reveals the thing which is within. You will recall the definition of beauty which Kalidasa gives, and as far as I am aware, it is the only definition of beauty that is truly satisfying, because all the modern mathematical definitions of beauty have only to do with symmetry. And what he describes is, in Sanskrit, the phrase goes, from moment to moment, which reveals newness, that is the form of beauty. Kshanai kshanai nutanam upeti tadeva rupam ramaniyataya. At each moment, it's as if, oh, something more, something more, something more. Newness. So when you look at a beautiful form, a face or a flower, oh, so nice, so beautiful, so beautiful. You can keep on looking because it's as if at each moment there's something new that's glowing out, and even though the form may not be changing. The child is sleeping, the flower is not moving in the wind, and yet it glows and glows and glows. And it is this which is the nature of that image of the eternal inner beauty. And what it glows out is what must increasingly become in the outer personality. So, more molded in the image of the eternal inner beauty. In other words, this personality has to become more and more a revealer of the true psychic personality within, shaping itself to align more and more to that. And one last step, more and more progressive towards the divinity of the secret spirit. And here there's no sense of form. This whole outer personality must progress, must tend towards the divinity of the secret spirit. Tend towards its divinity. There is the spirit within, which is secret, hidden behind all these layers. And the divinity that it is, that it represents, that it glows out, that it radiates, this must tend towards that. Very simply put, all of our outer nature, instead of concealing the inner truths of our being, must begin now to align to it and begin to be representative of it and even expressive of it, revealing the soul rather than concealing. It is that secret spirit or divinity of self in us which is imperishable, because it is unborn and eternal. And there's a profound implication to the way this is formulated. It is, first of all, imperishable. Why is it imperishable? Because it is unborn and eternal. What is the secret of being imperishable? Well, anything which is born had an origination out of something else. And therefore, in the very fact of its origination, it now has a relationship with that something else from which it originated. And that something else, if you look at the whole of the cosmos, that something else is in a constant flux of change. And when that change is great enough, this thing which originated from it has no more a link to the part from which it originated. The whole universe has moved forward to such a degree that I, as I was originating from that past, have no more a place in it. I break down because the universe is no more nourishing and supporting it. It has changed, I have to change. My change, if I keep on changing, eventually reaches a stage where I have changed so much I am no more what I was. Take a seed. After a point, you do not see the seed anymore. It becomes the plant. Watch the plant. After a point, you do not see plant anymore. It is a tree. After a point, there is no tree. But the material which was is always been, it's constantly flowing in nature. The form is gone because it had an origin. But what about that? Secret spirit or divinity of self in us is imperishable because it is unborn. It always was. It did not originate from something else. It was. It depends on nothing. Everything can change, it will still be because that is what it always was. So the first requirement is unborn and second, eternal. What it represents is not dependent on any process of change. And so the only thing you can say is, it is. It is that secret spirit or divinity of self in us which is imperishable because it is unborn and eternal. So increasingly the personality of the surface has to grow in its image, acquiring these characteristics. The psychic entity within, its representative, the spiritual individual in us, is the person, capital P, that we are. But the I of the moment, the I of this life is only a formation, a temporary personality of this inner person. Now he's putting these two in relation to each other. The first is what we are, the psychic entity within, and then its representative, the spiritual individual in us. So there are two aspects to it, the psychic entity and the individuality of this, the personality of this, which it is growing across lives, which is nothing but an expression of itself, now more and more complex, rich and mature, more capable in its skills and powers from all the lives that it has had. This is us, is the person that we are. But the I of this moment, the I of this life is only a formation, a gathering into form of material, a temporary personality of this inner person. Now, in our own consciousness, now we have to begin to make this shift. So far, we are identified with the surface I. I am this person looking inside. Oh, there must be a soul inside me. Is there a soul? I don't know. Rather, you shift the very nature of your identity deeper and deeper, progressively. Doesn't matter how long it takes. But the closer you get to that, the more the experience is, I am, and working through this personality. Increasingly, as you approach it, you have the sense of permanence, the sense of immortality. Even after a point, one begins to feel so vividly that yes, some point I'll have to shed the body. I will shed the body, and then there will be something else, some process, I don't know what, but I will always be. Even shed the personality, shed this mind formation, shed this habitual bundle of tendencies, not a big deal because I don't feel myself attached to it. That separation inward and an identification with the true person will be part of that process of the shift, the change which has to take place. And from this relationship now, what is the relationship with the outer personality? It is one step of the many steps of our evolutionary change. And it serves its true purpose only when we pass beyond it to a farther step, leading nearer to a higher degree of consciousness and being. Now, this analogy is extraordinary. It's very simple, but a step in a series of steps of our evolutionary change. Think of it this way: you are the soul. You take a step forward in your evolution by putting a personality. Use this as a support to move forward, and then you drop it and take another step in the new personality. And you move forward, shed it, and take another step in another personality. Think about it like that. Each personality is like a footprint that you have left behind in the material of the universe. What a beautiful image. Who's moving forward? The true person. And what's its relationship with the footprint and the step? Well, it has to go behind. And it has served its true purpose. It serves its true purpose only when we pass beyond it to a farther step. You can't say, I am so fond of this imprint of my foot on the soil, I must stay stuck with it. No, the whole point of it is to push back and to take another step. And it's fulfilled now. And the footprint says, my work is done. If at all it has a sense of identity. And where is this series of steps going? To a farther step leading nearer to a higher degree of consciousness and being. Always you'll find him putting these two terms together. Being is the experience of identity. Consciousness is the expression of that identity in awareness and the powers of that awareness. That's the essential existence of the soul and its powers of personality as it begins to deploy and unfold them in life. So both have to grow. The powers grow, that is obvious, but the being itself is as if more complete, more awake, and higher in grade of consciousness that it is able to express and live in. This part is often not understood fully in the nature of the evolution. Consider it this way. When the soul has identified itself or is at the level in evolution to a certain grade of, let's say, animal life, the powers that it may have, expressive of emotion or thought, to whatever degree they are able to develop, are representative of that level of consciousness. When that level of consciousness shifts up, the same powers may operate now on a new level of working. I'll give an example here of a dog. If any of you have had a dog that is unusually developed, unusually conscious, at least you may have met some in your life, you will notice the dog is on the brink of being able to articulate if it could only speak. You can even sense the crude formations of thought. It's puzzled, it's surprised, it is thinking, it's trying to arrange these contradictory facts. It's fascinating to see the dog adapt to a video call. So the dog is fond of its owner has gone away, you have a video screen through which the owner speaks, and the dog sees the face, hears the voice, very excited, and it tries to go behind looking for the person, and it keeps going round and round, and after a while, something settles in its mind and it accepts, okay, the person is not here, but somehow the person is here. And it accepts this. Extraordinary complexity, like a human child. Now you take this person out from the dog body and plant him into the human body. Suddenly now the complexity of thought it has developed has the power to express itself. In fact, you'll be surprised at how developed that state of consciousness is and its readiness to enter the human body experience. It's already risen in consciousness that it is capable of this, only the body was holding it back. But if you go back to a lower grade of evolution, the being of the soul is not yet awake enough to be able to articulate that kind of thought. It only feels, it senses, and it has a response, but not this level of development. So there are two very distinct things which grow. One is the being, higher degree of being, and then higher degree of consciousness. The being could have come into a point where it is now able to become conscious as a mental being, but the consciousness may not have developed its powers of expression. And they're two completely different things. There are people in whom there is a very great development of powers of expression. They can argue things out, but the poise from which they're seeing things is so narrow, so low, so limited, and they're not even conscious because they're so good in their arguing. And we can see the difference. So these are two very different parts in the evolution, but both are growing. So the steps of our journey, as the step is fulfilled precisely by going farther into the next step, we are moving towards nearer to a higher degree of consciousness and being. So I'm going to read this whole sentence once again, and you'll see what is captured so richly in the whole thing. There are two sentences, let's read. The I of the moment can only merit survival if it consents to change, to be no longer itself but something else, greater, better, more luminous in knowledge, more molded in the image of the eternal inner beauty, more and more progressive towards the divinity of the secret spirit. It is that secret spirit or divinity of self in us which is imperishable because it is unborn and eternal. The psychic entity within, its representative, the spiritual individual in us, is the person that we are. But the I of this moment, the I of this life, is only a formation, a temporary personality of this inner person. It is one step of the many steps of our evolutionary change. And it serves its true purpose only when we pass beyond it to a farther step, leading nearer to a higher degree of consciousness and being. So literally it's as if each step takes you one level up in consciousness and in being. It is the inner person that survives death, even as it pre-exists before birth. For this constant survival is a rendering of the eternity of our timeless spirit into the terms of time. And so this is again a profound insight with which we understand the relationship of our true person with the whole experience of time and change and universe. So first, this inner person is the one that survives death, even as it pre-exists before birth. It existed, it did not need to take birth, it was already there. Fine, it took birth, and with the death of what it took on, it survives. So the correction in our thinking should be, we never die. We are, have always been, always will be immortal. There are people who say, when I die, then you can do what you like. When I die, something. No, you don't die. You may shed the body, you may shed the personality. The personality may die, the body may die. And the analogy that Sri Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita is of the clothes. And you put on clothes, you shed the clothes. As long as the clothes are put on, they are animated. When you shed them, they collapse and crumble, effectively dead. But the person who put them on was always there, without clothes. He was there. After clothes, still there. That's the one who grows. And if you think of it in this way, 3 layers of clothing that we put on, that we shed for the purpose of experience. And through those clothes we absorb the experiences that they give access to. And we continue to make steps, taking on different clothing, different material for each step. For this constant survival is a rendering of the eternity of our timeless spirit into the terms of time. The spirit is timeless. By definition, it is beyond form, beyond change, beyond time, beyond space. But when it leans into the experience of space, time, and change, how does it represent itself, its eternity? By this very permanence of its being. The way we can conceive of it, which helps to appreciate this relationship of something timeless entering time. If you think of it in two different layers, one is the timeless, unchanging self, spirit, and then it puts out from it an energy that flows, and the continuous flow of relationships and incredibly complex flows of energies make for this appearance of the universe and make for the sense of time. And then this, which stands behind supporting the flow, but itself never flowing, never changing, always free, pushes a part of itself into the experience of this flow. Like a finger projecting, extending into space-time form limitation. But it is always free, always eternal. But now entering the space-time experience to enjoy it, never losing its eternity. But in order to fully appreciate the space-time experience, it gathers material made of the space-time material, like a clothing, temporarily in the flow. So as this gigantic flow is taking place, it gathers some material, through it explores, sheds the material, takes new material, explores, sheds, it always remaining free. See, as an image, it's a powerful image that allows you to appreciate the true nature of our eternity. It is the inner person that survives death even as it pre-exists before birth. And birth is not just in biological birth, before even coming into existence, it always existed. For this constant survival is a rendering of the eternity of our timeless spirit into the terms of time. Now comes the question. With all this background, we now recognize, yes, perhaps something is possible. And why does this idea come to us again and again that we should be able to somehow survive? And what is the truth behind it, and how is that to be fulfilled? And that's where the secret unfolds. But first, this persistence of the idea is what he points to. Particularly in this book, in the Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo presents every perspective of a problem. And particularly, when you look back at evolution and the nature of complexity of evolution, literally every perspective has been explored. If not by individuals at the very least, if not by collectives, at the very least by individuals. But mostly if an individual did it, a collective also explored it. And if there were many ways of exploring it, then somewhere in history, somewhere along time, each of these angles has been explored so that everything may move to one grand reconciliation and unity and breakthrough. So first he starts with this question. What our normal demand of survival asks for is a similar survival for our mind, our life, even our body. If we are that as the true person, which is always eternal, always pre-exists birth, always survives death, shouldn't that be the case for our mind, life, and body? That's what we're asking. Similar survival for mind, our life, even our body. Now, if you say you will survive the mind and life, but not the body, we may still accept it as a compromise. But it will be a compromise. You would want, ideally, even the body to be able to somehow be as eternal as the soul. But if someone said, all right, that you can agree to drop, as long as your mind continues and your emotional being, okay, you would still agree. The dogma of the resurrection of the body attests to this last demand. This idea you will find in many religions, that somehow the body will be resurrected, and particularly in Christianity, in the form that it took place in later years, not necessarily in its origins though. The idea that the body is going to survive, and later it came into the Islamic tradition, and therefore you had to bury the body because one day the angels will blow the trumpet and all the bodies will come back to life. Now, in the modern rational thinking, that seems so strange. And yet for a long time it was the belief deeply rooted in the peoples from this perspective. And the only form in which it survives today is, of course, in the more gory cinema, where you have the zombies, the dead becoming undead and walking the surface of the earth, now representing the end of times, because now their bodies are decayed. What's the point of a decayed body surviving? So, but still this idea that it persisted for so many centuries, that it even came up as an idea is important, because it points to a deeper truth, or it catches that truth and somehow warps it out of reality. You will find similarly in the Tibetan tradition, in the Buddhist tradition generally, this idea of what they call the rainbow body, where the monk has reached such a degree of tapas, different vocabulary for them perhaps, but the power of the energy of the sadhana is so intense that at the time of death, as he sheds his physical body, he concentrates his energy and turns the body into ashes, or dematerializes the body, or turns it into flowers, depending on traditions. But he continues to exist as if withdrawing from the physical into what they call rainbow body. And this body is as if immortal, but it's not physically tangible. And the idea somehow is a permanence just beyond the physical, but close enough that it could be almost considered a true physical permanence. There is this frequent idea of some of the sages who have now acquired an immortality of the body. Ashwatthama is one such from the Mahabharata. He is said to still roam around the world in a body which cannot die because of whatever the nature of the story, still suffering because of the wound, again from the story that comes. And what is interesting is there are people who have seen him, met him, and in physical form. There is similarly the idea of which was popularized by Paramahansa Yogananda, of his lineage emerging from Babaji, who lives in the Himalayas eternally in a body always young. But when you go deeper into these stories, you discover the body is not in permanence physically. It is held in some subtle physical or subtle domain and materialized as needed for the purpose of physical contact, and then ceases to be physical when that contact is no more required. So, strictly speaking, so far there has never been a physical immortality attained as far as we know. And yet, our ideal points to that. Even so, he says the dogma of the resurrection of the body attests to this last demand, and then he points to the new form that it takes place. It's no more rooted in the form of the belief that came with the religion, even as it has been the root of the age-long effort of man to discover the elixir of immortality, or any means, magical, alchemic, or scientific, to conquer physically the death of the body. And so he has captured the series in the evolution. Other than these religious forms, the next form it has taken is the age-long effort for an elixir of immortality. And you have so many stories. You drink this, you are immortal. But what is it that you have to drink? And the methods may be magical, alchemic, or scientific. It's interesting, he places all three together. If you try to analyze what is the distinction between them, you will not find a difference. What is magical, alchemic, and scientific? There's this famous statement from a scientist who said that if your technology evolves sufficiently, it is indistinguishable from magic. You take your mobile phone and go to a tradition, a tribe that has never seen electricity, You pick out of your pocket a little gadget and you speak into it, and somebody on the other side of the world speaks back. Magic. What would they do? They would look at the form of it and carve it out in stone, perhaps, and hold it to their ear and try to speak, or make that a ritual, if that was their tendency. But if you think about it and look at science fiction, going a few steps further, of the same idea, it goes to a degree that you look at that and say, no, it can't be, it's impossible, it's too magical, it cannot be even science. But when technology does get to that point, well, it is science. So, magic is nothing but the science which goes deeper behind the surface appearance. The word occult means hidden, concealed. Occultism or magic is nothing but the secret processes behind the appearance. And what is science? Digging into those secret processes. How is it different from occultism? Only in that the current model of science is exaggerated in its focus on physical processes or accessing higher processes through physical means, while occultism accessed those processes by non-physical means, use of mantra, for example. But again, science will give analogies to this. Creating vibrational patterns can actually solidify material or dissolve material. You could take matter and apply upon it certain frequencies of vibration until the matter just disintegrates. Or you could coalesce matter and render it rigid by application of resonant frequencies. So you see an analogy with the mantra, but the mantra is still mantra, mind focus, not physical vibration. It is mental vibration creating a similar coagulation of mental substance or vital substance, not physical. So other than the fact that they operate in different bays of material, they are identical. Magic and science. And in between, alchemic. Alchemic is the borderline where the two meet. Alchemy has a physical basis. You use mercury, sulfur, heating processes, mixing processes. But interestingly, it has a very strong psychological component. The alchemist has to have a certain state of consciousness, or the physical process is a symbol of a psychological internal process. So the mixing of the mercury or the sulfur represents the masculine and the feminine principle. And if you look at the alchemical formula, it's a physical transcription of a psychological process. The transmutation of physical material from base metal of mercury or iron into gold is the transmutation of your consciousness from ignorance into illumination. And the analogies are so close that at some point the alchemist is found to be much more a spiritual practitioner working on physical materials in a deeply interwoven symbolism, which suggests in the long run that if I can transmute my consciousness by physical support, or I can infuse my consciousness change into the physical change, cannot your body also similarly transmute itself to become of its nature immortal, gold? And so that's the analogy by which the alchemist also aims not only to change matter into gold for the sake of money, that's not the goal, to make the body permanent and immortal or divinized in some way. That's the analogy and that's the idea. But immortality. So the magical means of immortality would be, for example, and you'll see these kinds of stories in the magical traditions, that either there is a mantra for immortality, which you will repeat, or a certain ritual that you will perform, which draws certain powers that would make for the immortality, or infuse the powers into a liquid, which then you drink for the immortality, or whatever. But the focus of the magic in its peak was to make permanence or seek permanence of some kind. The same with the alchemy and the same with science. At its highest, at its most advanced cutting edge, science is also aiming in its application for permanence of some kind. If you look at artificial intelligence, there is a dream that perhaps we can upload our mind into the cloud, into some computer systems, and thereby become immortal. Or if you go into biotechnology, there's the idea that perhaps if we tap into the biology processes and modify peptides or amino acids or the RNA processes, get into the programming of the cells, we could unprogram the aging and decay or reprogram for permanence and immortality, or at least longer youth or even eternal youth of some kind. Either way, the goal is somehow fulfilled when materially we can reflect the nature of the self and the soul, as we could perhaps in the mind and the life. Why are we seeking for this? What is the secret behind this need to make permanent? We could simply say, well, because the soul is permanent, therefore we seek to live it in the surface personality, which is all we know. And somehow we know we are immortal in there, so now we have to recreate it here. But perhaps also the idea is an evolutionary purpose, an evolutionary sense of nature in her larger goal, which is now what we are catching in our thinking. To stop short of this would feel for us as if evolution fell short. Evolution would be for us fulfilled and ideally complete when that immortality within is reflected in the immortality outside. So we come now to this idea. But this aspiration could only succeed if mind, life, or body could put on something of the immortality and divinity of the indwelling spirit. Knowing that that is the only thing which is immortal, and everything else necessarily must undergo change and therefore transition of death when it ceases to be what it was, but something else now. The only way you can have the immortality in the form is if mind, life, or body could put on something of the immortality and divinity of the indwelling spirit. And this is now we are entering the secret of immortality. There are certain circumstances in which the survival of the outer mental personality, representative of the inner mental Purusha, could be possible. It could happen if our mental being came to be so powerfully individualized on the surface and so much one with the inner mind and inner mental Purusha, and at the same time so open plastically to the progressive action of the infinite, that the soul no longer needed to dissolve the old form of mind and create a new one in order to progress. The soul doesn't need to dissolve it if these conditions are fulfilled. And a similar individualization, integration, and openness of the vital being on the surface would alone make possible a similar survival of the life part in us, the outer vital personality, representative of the inner life being, the vital Purusha. We're going to look at all this in greater detail next time, but right now we complete the thought. What would really happen then is that the wall between the inner self and the outer man would have broken down. And the permanent mental and vital being from within, the mental and vital representatives of the immortal psychic entity, would govern the life. Our mind nature and our life nature could then be a continuous, progressive expression of the soul, and not a nexus of successive formations preserved only in their essence. So they won't merely be the link point for this step, then that step, then that step. They would actually be an expression of this inner. Our mental personality and life personality would then subsist without dissolution from birth to birth. They would be, in this sense, immortal, persistently surviving, continuous in their sense of identity. I am still the same person that was after I have shed this body and taken on the new body. The overall personality can still continue. But there are these conditions which have to be fulfilled, and we're going to look at those in detail. This would be evidently an immense victory of soul and mind and life over the inconscience and the limitation limitations of material nature. And in the next paragraph after that, which is the last paragraph of the chapter, he discusses, is that even possible for the body? And if so, what would be the condition for the physical body? But now we have got here the secret of immortality. Practically for you to be able to literally shed the body and continue with the same personality into the next. But for that, the personality itself has to undergo 3 radical changes, all of which essentially are aligning it to the spiritual being within and representing it more and more completely through these 3 facets, which he has summarized as individualization, integration, and openness. These will be the 3 key words. First, it has to be sufficiently individualized. Second, it has to be integrated. And then it has to be open to the whole plastic process of change. But there are 2 different levels. You cannot join mind and life. Each has behind it a certain representative inner life being, inner mind, which are representatives of the soul. So there's a lot of new vocabulary here, which we will have to explore and appreciate the relationship between these levels, and then explore what that means and how we can consciously put into practice this process. I began this series with this idea, it's now perhaps the 4th class that we have, with this idea that it is urgent for us to be able to develop some kind of a sense of continuity of life across incarnation. So that what we have built up in this lifetime as a conscious spiritual orientation and a rich base of experience and even the gifts of the divine blessings we have received in this lifetime, that they can be carried over into the next without losing everything and having to start all over again in a new personality and learning it all over again, and how much time is wasted. And while the soul may continue in terms of consciousness, in terms of the struggle it will have with the personality, all of that can be so much reduced, simplified. And if this content and the sense of conscious intention and even the practical results of our growth can be carried into the next, how much more rapid the evolution would be for the fulfillment that we seek to realize in our evolution. And so we have now come to the crux of this and the method by which this has to be done, which we will take up next time in detail. And for the moment, I will just read this sentence which summarizes the process of this change, and we can then meditate on it. But this aspiration could only succeed if mind, life, or body could put on something of the immortality and divinity of the indwelling spirit. There are certain circumstances in which the survival of the outer mental personality, representative of the inner mental Purusha, could be possible. It could happen if our mental being came to be so powerfully individualized on the surface and so much one with the inner mind and inner mental Purusha, and at the same time so open plastically to the progressive action of the infinite, that the soul no longer needed to dissolve the old form of mind and create a new one in order to progress. So here we would have fulfilled the demand of nature, where she wants you to have that plasticity for the evolution, and the requirement for the soul's evolution to have a personality which can express itself as it needs, when it needs, without needing to replace the whole material all over again.